Day 41.
In years, it was just the best thing.
I wasn't kind of like used to feeling happy.
It was a part of me that I've never had, but now I've found.
And then I thought to myself, now it all makes sense.
I thought, I know the way to end all the world's problems, give everyone a pill and make them dance.
It all kind of fell into place, and I was thinking to myself, why have I never done this before? Why have I never thought of being like this before?
Why the fuck ain't the world like this all the time? Why?
In Ibiza, people were taking ecstasy, but you've got to understand also that island was very, very special at that time. You had a very strange mix of people. You had kind of wealthy jet setters, film stars, pop stars there. You've got fantastically glamorous Spanish transvestites there. You've got kind of like the weirdest people from all of their respective countries, all in a club together. An open-air club that was open all night, and you were dancing and the sun would come up over you. So there was all of that as well as drugs. It wasn't just a drug thing.
If you could go back to that first trip to Ibiza, could you have ever imagined, you know, that 16 years later you'd be involved in such a huge scene?
On the way to on that trip, no. On the way back from it, yeah, because it was pretty obvious, I think, to all of us that we'd fallen on something that was going to change our lives.
And you wanted to bring that vibe back to
Absolutely.
to
I mean, it was hard to forget it. If you have something nice, it's natural instinct to want to recreate it whenever you can.
Recreating the Ibiza atmosphere of all-night open-air parties in rainy old Britain was to prove difficult.
Tango, please!
Faced with stringent licensing laws, the party scene was forced underground. But Britain was about to be hit by a new wave of music that consisted of a lot more than a few dodgy Spanish holiday records.
This is Roundhouse Recording Studios, and I'm looking for Mr. Denny Rampling.
Those returning Balearic evangelist DJs brought back with them a whole new way of putting together music, lighting, DJing and drugs. One of the first clubs for the scene was Shoom, started by Danny Rampling.
Danny, a lot of people sort of credit you with being one of the pioneers of the whole clubbing scene. Do you think that's a fair description?
I certainly do, yeah. I certainly helped pioneer the whole thing, and that spirit and drive that I had at the beginning of the whole thing and that awareness of what we had certainly helped the development of the whole scene here in the UK, in fact worldwide, really.
What was interesting for me is that you had guys that would have punched your teeth in, you know, coming up and embracing you, hugging you, saying, "All right, George, you all right, mate?" Do you remember that kind of, that whole thing happening?
It was very positive. If you look at all the youth movements before, how positive was that? People were coming together. You look at mods and rockers and punks and Teds. They were all positive fashion statements, but along with that, there was conflict between different groups of youth. Whereas this thing united everybody together. That was part of the whole idealism. It transcended all clubs. Maybe some of that was drug-fueled, with the use of ecstasy as a tool towards that. But there was a lot of genuine love and unity in the air, and the music also contributed to that.
Ecstasy had reached British shores and was finding its way into many big city clubs, including Manchester's very first super club, the Hacienda.
From being a great club, suddenly became a life-changing experience. And that's really when the ecstasy had started kicking in.
The kind of birth or explosion of ecstasy in Manchester was really, really quick. It was almost like a Mexican wave. It was that quick, you know, over maybe a week or 2 weeks. People up this end would start going mad, and then it just crept, and then after a couple of weeks, the whole place was just hanging from the rafters.
It was madness. People would be dancing everywhere. You know, they'd be dancing on the stairs, in the cloakroom queue, in the toilet queue, you know, the whole building was just shaking. It was fantastic.
In the early days, we'd go to Camden Palace on a Friday. There'd be 3,000 people in the club, but there'd be just one tiny corner, and in this tiny corner there may be like 200 people, and they'd be screaming ecstasy, ecstasy, and everybody else looking at them thinking, what are they going on about? And then in the space of a month, the whole building was then shouting ecstasy.
One witness to the ecstasy wave that was sweeping the country was law graduate turned DJ, Judge Jules.
Do you think the acid house scene could have existed without ecstasy? Do you think the music was enough by itself?
The fundamental thing was the music, and without that, there would have been no acid house movement. And ecstasy was important, but I think that ecstasy would have been popular in all places where there was a gathering of young people who, whether they take it long-term, like to experiment recreationally with drugs. And I think ecstasy exists outside dance culture because it's just what young people do. Having said that, it did become a popular drug around the same time as dance culture reached en masse proportions.
One of the interesting things was that ecstasy and the use of that drug acted as this kind of pacifier and really kind of created this sort of love generation thing.
It's difficult to know whether ecstasy actually changed British society for good, but I'm sure it's no coincidence that football hooliganism vanished overnight in '88 and '89.
The late 70s and early 80s were violent times. Gangs, not just football, but council estate gangs, political gangs, all sorts of gangs were around. And then ecstasy came along and people got chilled. People got chilled. You'd find yourself in a warehouse party that was dark, and then like 7 o'clock in the morning when it became light, you find that you're in the room and there's half of Millwall in there, half of Chelsea in there, half of Arsenal in there. But everyone just looked at everyone and said, what a great party. And then violence sort of declined because people were just too busy having a good time to think about anything else.
I think what you had was a whole generation who'd had nothing really to call their own. Since punk, there hadn't been a big musical movement. So I think for a whole lot of people, they felt they'd found something that gave them an identity, that made them part of a big gang, and also it was a hell of a lot of fun. And it wasn't a time when there was a lot of fun about. Everybody who went to one of these events went back the next time with 5 friends. So you started with events for about 2,000 people. Within a year, it had been pushed out to the fields outside the M25, and you were talking 20, 25,000 people at some of the big events.
I was sitting in a pub on a Sunday afternoon. I got talking to a chap that told me it was really hard to find places to put these raves on. And at that point, I kind of thought, hang on, I know about 50 or 60 plots of land. And a little light went on in my head and just went, opportunity. Because I was sort of arranging these commercial loans for all these people, like Asda and Texas and Sainsbury's, to build on around the M25. You could phone up the farmer and just basically make him an offer to hire his land for the weekend.
Following instructions via mobile phone recorded messages, revellers flocked in their thousands to secret locations around the M25, causing complete mayhem.
My first experience as pay parties as the commander of a very large area that was surrounded by the M25 was an unusually large amount of traffic up and down the motorways on Friday and Saturday evenings. And this traffic never started until about 11:45 to 1 o'clock in the morning, which was a most unusual time to have traffic on your motorways. And I began to get the impression then that I had a problem, to put it mildly.
I didn't really ever know where I was going in particular. We just used to all follow each other.
There's been about 7 or 8 of us in a little escort, all looking for this field.
There's this feeling of naughtiness. You know, you're a desperado.
The feeling was fantastic, very much like we all knew a secret.
You never really knew whether it was going to happen or not, or you'd be in the middle of a field and then somebody come along in a little metro and tell you it's in another field 20 miles up the road.
When you get out your car and you'd hear the tunes pumping and you'd think, oh, this is great.
I think forbidden fruit often tastes sweeter, and I think people embrace this pirate identity of the illegal raves with great fervour. There's nothing more exciting than outwitting a big battalion of police and letting rip at a party afterwards.
The great thing was finding them. You'd be lost for hours and hours and hours. You'd drive over a hill and suddenly there it was, this kind of like fantasy world built for you, you know. It was incredibly exciting. It was also an incredibly exciting time. A lot of the people involved in this really did think it was going to change everything. It changed them personally a lot, opened them up to a lot of things. Therefore they thought it would change the world. But the amazing thing that was going on at the same time was the Berlin Wall did come down. Nelson Mandela did walk out of prison. There were huge changes going on in the world that felt like part of this. It was a very euphoric time.
One person whose life was transformed by acid house was the now best-selling author of Trainspotting, Irvine Welsh.
Do you think that acid house could have been as popular as it was without ecstasy?
I don't think it probably would have existed in any mainstream form without ecstasy. I don't think the music would have made any sense without it. I mean, it's like kind of sort of pub culture without alcohol. You know, just the two just went together. I mean, nobody would have stood in the field in the freezing cold in Scotland in the late 80s, you know, unless they had something inside them. You know, they're not going to dance in a cold field all night long. You know, it just wouldn't have made any sense.
And do you think that, I mean, ecstasy worked so well because it looked like a sort of headache pill? You know, it just looked like a very sort of nice chemical.
Nice and very easy to take, you know. You think yourself, well, this can't really do me that much damage. You know, it's not like I'm cooking up this mixture and banging it into my veins, or you know, chasing it in a bit of oil and sitting there. We're just sitting there with this nice little pill, and I'm going to take it and wash it down with some water, and I'll be happy.
It really was quite a bizarre scene. You could hear the music for 5 1/4 miles. We had the decibels checked. And I thought I'd had a funfair set up on me that I hadn't any local knowledge of. That was my first impression, until I said to my drug squad, get me everything you can on ecstasy, and they took about 48 hours. But when they arrived on my desk, I realised that this is nothing about people wanting to party. This is people that actually want to take drugs.
As more and more people joined the party, you didn't have to be the brightest of journalists to realise the potential for a story.
When you had this initial coverage, it was mildly positive, and it's seen as another sort of tame and rather silly youth cult. Smiley t-shirts for sale.
In the clothing department, we've got acid house smiley face t-shirts.
But then there was this sudden realisation, oh no, what have we done? We're advertising a drug cult. Immediately they pulled these t-shirts off sale and started running these heavy-duty editorials about the evils of pushers targeting our pop kids.
Media pressure meant that the police had to be seen to be doing something.
Our policy has been to stop these parties because they're unlicensed and because of our concerns for public order and indeed public safety.
By this time, we were turning out 250 plus police officers on a Saturday night, and we'd started using helicopters for spotting. But every time I stepped up a tactic, they would step up a tactic against me.
My boyfriend at the time was a printer, began to print off a load of, you know, moody flyers like, drugs tonight, with a big smiley face, South London, all meet in Croydon or whatever. And then we get one of our friends' mums to go into the police station and say, oh, I found this in my son's bedroom, I think it's for an illegal rave. So the acid squad in Kent Atherton all go down to South London. Meanwhile, we're going up the M1 on our way to Buckinghamshire.
We then started to do what Sunrise did. We got our own radio station, and we started to relay messages, sending people all over the place. Again, it went wrong. We sent them to Colchester one night where they smashed 2 garages up on the way and looted them completely.
Police and local authorities have clashed with partygoers over noise and traffic nuisance, sustaining injuries and making many arrests.
At a certain point, you had this kind of really heavy sort of police involvement because, you know, there was stuff in all the tabloids and there was a huge reaction. Do you remember at what point that kind of all changed and became really kind of a huge thing?
At the time, the whole issue of pay parties was a much more grey area legally. Subsequently, there were a number of, I would call them draconian bits of legislation brought in to counteract pay parties. But because it was a grey area, the bigger promoters realised that the thing to do was to have an on-site lawyer. So you'd have these kind of heated debates about the legality of these events between the on-site lawyer and a very senior policeman. And it was literally down to the wire whether the event would take place, dependent on the ability of the lawyer to persuade the policeman that, yes, this did fall within the confines of the law.
The minute we touched their equipment, they would lay a counterclaim for damage to equipment or for harassment, whatever you like to think of, they came at us with. I was taking out every agency I could find. And of course, these organisers feared the Batman more than they feared us, to be honest with you. There's no doubt that the powers weren't good enough for the police really to do the job effectively.
Well, it was a game of cat and mouse, and we always won.